Hey guys, it's Darren. Welcome back to the Touch MBA podcast. I want to wish you all a happy 2021. And for those of you who might be celebrating the Lunar New Year as well. And I hope that you are all safe and healthy out there. So over the past few months, I have worked with a couple applicants on their applications. And I realized that I was saying a lot of the same things to each of them, even though they were all very different. I was saying stuff like, paint the scene for me. I was saying stuff like, the more details you provide, the more powerful your story. I also would ask them what they mean by certain things. What do you mean by responsible investing? What do you mean by sustainable energy? This is just a sample of some of the comments, right? I was making on these applicants' essays and resumes because our goal was to make their application as memorable and compelling as possible. Upon reflection, after helping these 4 or 5 applicants, I realized that a lot of what I was asking them to do was related to the 5 senses. So that's why I'm going to title this episode, Using the 5 Senses to Make Your MBA Application More Memorable, to make it more 3-dimensional, to make it more concrete, more tangible. When you start to think of your application using your 5 senses, I think it's a good framework to challenge you to create a better application. So let's start with the first sense, to see. So like I mentioned, I found myself telling these applicants over and over to paint the scene for me. Don't just give an overview of the story in 1 or 2 sentences, but take me into the scene of that story. So let me give you one example. One applicant who is applying to Duke, and I really like Duke's 25 Random Things essay. I think it's a really great format for applicants to share more about themselves. But for one of his 25 random things, he wrote, I still plan holidays with my housemates from university. Last year, Marco the Italian, Eduardo the Spaniard, and I voyaged to Malta and nearby islands for 2 weeks. Okay, this is a really cool story, right? And that's exactly what I thought. I'm like, this sounds really interesting. You voyaged to Malta? It sounds like they're on a special boat or they're having a really special adventure and I want to know more, right? It's still too up in the clouds, that description, voyaging to Malta. So I asked the applicant, like, there has to be a story here, right? Like, how did you guys voyage to Malta and where did you go? And like, paint me the scene of that. So after taking this advice, this is what the applicant wrote. I still plan holidays with my housemates from university. Last year, Marco the Italian, Eduardo the Spaniard, and I spent 2 weeks exploring blue lagoons surrounding Malta in a wooden pirate ship. So can you see the difference? Can you see that picture of a wooden pirate ship exploring blue lagoons with his housemates from university? I think that's a much stronger way to say the same thing, right? So paint the scene, paint the picture. Let me give one more example. One of his other bullets was landing 3rd place in an international dance contest opened doors for me to professional dance sport, and dancing has remained my key creative outlet. Now, that's a super impressive accomplishment as a dancer, and this is coming from a dancer myself. Landing 3rd place in an international dance contest is no joke, right? That's a great accomplishment. But this applicant had already mentioned this accomplishment in his resume, right? So the reader would already know that, wow, like this applicant's a really good dancer. So how can we paint the scene here? So this is what I asked the applicant to do. I said, maybe you can expand on how you have ballroom dance for over 20 years and what this has taught you. And so this is what he ended up writing or changing this bullet to. Holding your hand 5 degrees lower than expected can decide your outcome in a professional dance contest. Practice makes perfect. became my key driving force in dancing and life. Can you see the difference? Can you feel the difference? This second version tells me so much more about the applicant. It sheds light on one of his life philosophies, and he does this through telling the story of dancing, of holding his hand 5 degrees lower. That can make all the difference in the international competition, right? So I get a much stronger picture of who this applicant is. And it wasn't like these bullets just changed after one edit. They went through, multiple rounds to get there. But again, if you can try to paint a picture in your essays, especially, I think this is really helpful. And what I realized when working with these 4 applicants is, let's say they send me the first draft of their essays. I always want to expand more. So they'll mention like, oh yeah, I want a dance sport competition, but I want to know, oh, well, what does that mean to you? What has dancing taught you? How has dancing affected you, right? So I always have more questions on what they're writing. So in the second draft, I ask them to really expand upon those questions and don't be shy with the word count. So oftentimes the word count of the essay balloons, right? So it goes from say 300 words to 700 words or 500 words to 1,000 words because they're talking a lot more, providing a lot more detail, painting a lot more scenes for those questions, that I ask. And then, right, we take that abundance of content and then pick the most vivid pictures, pick the most vivid scenes to include in the essay. So then we end up cutting down on the words. So you could think of this as like maybe the shape of a vase or the shape of a teapot, where the first draft is, narrow, and then the second draft is really wide in the middle, right? Because there's a lot more words. And then the third draft is narrow again at the bottom. But I think this teapot technique of editing essays is, I've realized, that's how I've always done it, and the results have been really, really good. So again, the point is paint a picture in your essays, paint the scene. Okay, let's go to the second sense, and that sense is touch. And by touch, I mean make me feel something when I'm reading your essay, right? Make me feel something. And usually this means being vulnerable and opening up about your life and your struggles, and perhaps your struggles, the struggles of those around you. It's sharing the grand causes of your life. And when I say grand causes, I don't mean like saving the world, or saving a country, right? These are like massive causes that you might imagine in a movie. But what's most important is the why, the cause has to be meaningful to you. It could be, nurturing your small little garden in this small little corner of the world, like this small pet peeve cause that you have, or helping a family member or helping a friend, or, it could be infinite things, right? But this is like what really drives you. Like, I want to know why. And usually this means opening up more about your story. Does that make sense? So let me share one example. So I worked with one applicant, and he immigrated from India to Singapore early on in his life. And he would go to school and take out his lunch, made from his family, and just start eating his lunch with his hands. And in Singapore at that time, people would just make fun of him, like, what the hell are you doing eating with your hands? And this applicant was super embarrassed about it because in India, it was no big deal. But, in Singapore, he's trying to assimilate into a new school, and all his classmates are making fun of him because he's eating with his hands. And you can imagine the pain of that. And then he talked about how, because of that experience, he not only learned to integrate, better with the larger cultural group that he was living in, but he also had a lot more empathy for outsiders and new people joining a class, whether that was in school, whether that was at work, joining a new team or joining a new department. So he really went out of his way to become a student leader to help bring new people into these clubs and new people into the teams and help incorporate them right into these groups. And I thought that was a really strong story to share. And so, his accomplishment might be he was student leader of, XYZ extracurricular group, or he was relied on by his bosses to mentor new employees to the company. But I want to hear why. I want to go underneath that action, and hearing that story makes his applicant much more memorable. Another example is recently I was working with an applicant who has a marketing background. And even though he studied engineering in university, he's basically worked professionally as a marketer. And in his spare time, he's a VJ. Yeah, pretty cool. So he designs all the videos that are going on while, a DJ is playing. And behind him, you see all the graphics and animations and so forth. And this was just mentioned offhandedly during our conversation. And I'm like, why isn't this in your resume? Why don't you mention this? I mean, he's worked on dozens of shows and done this for years. And so he mentioned it in his resume, but I'm like, well, how could I feel this more? It's one thing to say you're a VJ and you've, worked on dozens of shows, but well, there's proof of that, right? There's proof that you've been a VJ. So let me see some of your work. So he ended up creating a link to his personal website where you could see, all the shows he's worked on, and you can actually feel the art that he created. And I think that's so powerful, especially now in today's applications, because you can really make them more three-dimensional. If I was applying for an MBA, I would include links to some of the Touch MBA podcasts, right? I host a show and there's proof of my work. My work is out there to see. So in the same way, those of you who have these sort of backgrounds or have this sort of evidence, this multimedia evidence, or just any sort of work that makes you more three-dimensional, don't hold back and don't be afraid to share that on your, LinkedIn profile or even on your MBA resume. So that's the second sense, touch. Now let's go to the third one, which is hear, right? To hear. And I think the key question with the hearing sense is, what's your point of view? And I found myself asking this, if not directly to the applicants, trying to indirectly suss their point of view out, right? Because it helps to have a distinct point of view on the world, on your industry, on your beliefs, with your beliefs, on opportunities that you see in the world or causes that you believe in. What's your perspective, right? I think a lot of this is about, not just being another bland applicant, another sort of application that merges in with the rest of the application, but really sticks out because you have a strong point of view on, your industry, on your career, on the opportunities. I mean, that's typically where I think the point of view really helps, right? It's one thing to say, for example, that I want to help small businesses with marketing technology that large companies have access to, but small businesses don't, right? Because maybe it's inaccessible to them or they can't afford it. So, okay, that's the start of a point of view, but how can we make this more memorable, right? So then that's tying in this applicant's background. Why would he care about helping the little guys, helping small business? Maybe it's because he's an artist himself. Maybe it's because he's the son of a family business that struggled with marketing their services, right? So you bring in more of a story why. This is, again, reflecting back on the touch sense. But then also showing how he has the professional chops as well to really have a point of view here, that there is this market need for that. And for these reasons and so forth, based on, the big companies he's worked with and the smaller businesses he's worked with and so forth. So at least he's coming in with kind of a more memorable point of view as opposed to, I want to be in marketing, right? As at least he has a view of the marketing industry and where he could add value. That's what I mean by point of view. And also just from a personal side, this quote is from Stephen Colbert. He was interviewed by the New York Times, and I'll link to it in the show notes, but he was talking about the late night show Stephen Colbert is a famous host comedian in the United States, and he's hosted like the Colbert Show and now the Late Night Show, for those of you who aren't from the US. So he's a very well-known comedian. But this is what he said. He said, all shows are essentially emotional events. You're sharing an emotional state with the audience. So once you know how you emotionally feel, you know which jokes are clever tricks and which jokes you mean. And gosh, I think I heard that like 2 or 3 years ago, but I stopped what I was doing, wrote that quote down, and now finally I'm using this quote in a podcast. But it really struck me because I think this is the art of putting together a great application. It's finding that right emotional tone so that what you're saying is not like a clever trick or you're saying something because you think the adcom, wants to hear that. But what you're saying is like really authentically true to your real genuine tone. Wow, there's a lot of adjectives there, but I think you know what I mean, that what you're saying is not a clever trick. It's something you really mean. That's my point. So, and when you write about things that really matter to you, and if you write in the voice that really rings true, and you're not just saying things to get a reaction, but it's really authentic and genuine and rings true, it sounds amazing. And it's very touching as well at the same time. So this is why when I'm helping applicants with consulting, I like to talk to them on the phone, for a while, so I can really, and see them as well, so I can really get like a feel for them, not just, all their professional accomplishments and how they plan to prepare their MBA application, but get a feel for them as people and kind of, the uniqueness of each person and the genuineness, like what things really move this person, and then try to take those things and incorporate them in the application. If you're not working with a consultant, then maybe you can work with your colleagues at work or even peers, and just don't apply in a vacuum, right? That's what I always say. Get someone to read your essays. Don't just ask them, does this sound like me? But really ask them, like, is the essence of me coming through, right? Because those are two different questions. As a friend, you kind of know how I am, and is my unique point of view that I bring coming through in these essays? Maybe those are questions you can ask your readers who are your friends or your colleagues. Okay, let's move on to the next sense, taste. Okay, so is this crazy to think like that your application can taste like something? Yeah, maybe, but I think it's a really helpful metaphor, right? The first thing is don't be bland. And what I mean by that is don't say something any other applicant can say. Like if you're applying to Harvard, stereotypical example, like, oh, I'm applying to Harvard because of the case study method. Well, any other applicant can say that. So that sentence does not add to the reader's understanding of who you are as a person and what drives you, right? It's bland. There's no flavor to that sort of sentence, right? So think about food. Yeah, like when you're going through your application in its totality, don't be the restaurant that has the 30-page menu with, burgers and pasta and Asian food and sandwiches and so forth. Be the restaurant where you have a really strong idea of the food you're going to get, whether it's the best burger in town or the best pho in town or the best sushi, or the best pasta, whatever. Let me make this a little more concrete. Aside from not saying something that any other applicant can say, a lot of this is about breaking stereotypes as well. So one of the most talented demographics and probably the most competitive demographic is being an Indian engineer applying to business school to be a consultant. It's so common, you need to spice it up somehow. So the best way to do that is to kind of break the stereotype, right? Whether it's maybe you change your career goal or with your interests and what you do and so forth. So I think this goes back to two of the first 5 episodes I ever recorded for this podcast. Gosh, 8 years ago? Episode number 3, 6 ways to make your MBA application stick. And episode number 4, 4 ways to get and keep the AdCom's attention. Especially episode 4 is probably more related to what I'm saying. So if you go to touchmba.com and you go to our podcast section, and on the right, you can see, all the podcasts categorized. Go to under great applications. There's one category called how to get and keep attention. And I've categorized 20 podcast episodes there. And if you go back into the archives, because some of you might not be able to find this like on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, but again, touchmba.com/podcast, go back and see some of these old, I won't call them classics, but I think that they're still very valuable. But I talk about, how important it is to break stereotypes to be memorable. And when you keep taste in mind, a lot of this is about reinforcing your positioning, right? Once you figure that out. So going back to this marketer who was a VJ, even though he was an engineer, right? He'd say something like, I want to build my career in technology and marketing in his career goals essay. And I would flip that around and say, I want to build my career in marketing, design, and technology, which is true. And you could say they're the same thing, but I think those little things make a difference. Whereas like the reader will associate him with marketing, design, VJ, graphic design, arts. Like this is how he can break the stereotype of being an engineer. And those subtle little things, like changing the word order or bringing out, like I said earlier, videos of his marketing campaigns and of his VJing and so forth. It just all adds up into this story of like, okay, he studied as an engineer, but basically he's a creative, right? And he's trying to combine his creativity and his marketing expertise with more business skills to, start this company that will help small businesses with sophisticated marketing tools and so forth. But everything is like building to that very distinct taste, right? It's very easy to pick out. All right. I hope this makes sense and is not too vague. One last thing is, the more personal and specific with your reasons why, the more light you shed on who you are. Again, this is something I found myself telling all the applicants. Let me give one example. One applicant was applying to a top business school in Singapore, and one of the reasons he wants to apply to Singapore Business School is because this is a unique city that kind of blends East and West, right? Well, any other applicant could say that again, right? So how can he leave more of a taste? It's by being more specific about this. So what's the story underneath, applying to Singapore where East meets West? It's about how, his father is French and his mother is Filipino, and how he has always sought to deepen the connection between these two cultures his entire life. And then that's related to, where he went to Hong Kong to work and other things he's done in his life, right? So in other words, tell me something I don't know about you. Don't just tell me you're applying to this business school in Singapore because Singapore is where East meets West. But if you're going to say that, well, like, why is that relevant to you? Tell me something I don't know about you. Leave more of a taste. Finally, the last sense is smell. And when I say smell, I think the first question is, does this pass the smell test? Right? And admissions officers are really good at sniffing out whether an application smells funny. And what I mean by that is, like, is everything matching up? Are the details in your resume and your online application, your essays, are they matching up? Is your voice similar across your essays? Is your voice in your essays similar to your essay in the AWA section of the GMAT? And I mean, because I did this with thousands of applications, like over time, you're able to kind of sniff out, like something will raise a question in your mind. Maybe there's a gap that's not explained in the resume, or just something's out of order. Adcoms are experts at this. So you want to make sure everything lines up so you don't smell funny. And rule number 2 would be don't smell bad. Obvious rule. And when I say don't smell bad, I think I'm really referring to your tone and your sort of attitude and behavior with the admissions committee, and just in general with your interactions with the school, whether that's, it could be from students to alumni to the admissions office to professors to everyone you're interacting with. If you're super arrogant and you just treat people like poorly, especially those you have nothing to gain from, this smells really bad. This leaves a really bad smell. And yeah, makes you not as attractive as an applicant. So, just be respectful. I'm not saying you have to suck up to everyone, but just be, respectful and easy to deal with. And like that can go a long way. Yeah. So if you can pass like not smelling funny, not smelling bad, then you want to leave the reader with a deep fragrance of who you are so that like the admissions committee is more curious to learn more about you in an interview. I think smell is kind of like the final sense that ties everything together. So yeah, I hope that going through the 5 senses and these examples that I share with you helps you think, use this framework when you're editing your own application. Like go through each of the senses and think, how can I paint the scene better here? How can I convey my emotional state about how I feel about this career goal or these people that I serve or this community that I'm involved in? How can I pass that along to the reader? How can I share this emotional state? How can I make sure that my unique point of view is coming across to the reader, so that I don't sound so generic or sterile, and, get your friends and colleagues to help you here. How can I be memorable? How can I really, not taste bland? How can I say something that is always telling the reader something they don't know and helping the reader know what you're all about and giving them a strong taste about who you are? Because you're all super unique. And I think the hard part is, many times we're afraid to really express that in the application because we think the readers want to hear something else. But, how can your unique taste come through in your application? And finally, pass those smell tests of not smelling funny and not smelling bad. And then hopefully the totality of all those senses will, leave a deep fragrance in the minds of your readers. And they'll be like, oh man, this is such an interesting applicant. We need to interview this person so we can learn.